There's this thing, I've seen it in my comments, and I know I'm going to see it in the comments here, that black gay people are black first, which is a really weird and stupid thing to try to assert. The underlying point to that comment is that because they're black first, they should be okay with other black people mistreating them on the basis of being gay. There's no other reason to point that out. Because whenever I hear black people complain about gay black people doing something, all they're really doing is defending themselves against aggressive, homophobic black people doing the most because nobody checks them on that shit. See this week's Lil Boosie tweet and probably whatever tweet that'll come out between recording and later on, because that dude cannot shut the fuck up about Lil Nas X. But we want Lil Nas X to say he's black first. You think he doesn't know that? Happy Halloween, everybody. So this is a different intro than you might have seen on the Patreon version if you're returning. But yeah, so this is a different intro than you will see on the Patreon version or another version of this video that you might have access to. Talk about that a little later. And I'm re-recording the intro because the initial intro of the video was really just a lot of raw thought and emotion on this topic. But it was a little too long, and I wanted to kind of summarize it here because I know that I'm going to have certain eyes on this video that are not my usual audience and that maybe have a lot they could get from this video if they just take the time to listen. That's what I hope. So, number one, the purpose of this video is not to explain why you should cancel Dave Chappelle. One thing that I really wish I'd have taken more time to talk about in the video is that it's very clear that Dave wants to be canceled. Using that canceled narrative is actually clearly a big part of his brand at the moment. He wants to create this, you know, cult of personality around the fact that he's the comedian saying the things that people don't want him to say and still going. That sadly is a strong draw for certain audiences, and it seems like his audience has changed a little bit. Dave knows that there's a lot of people that are very reactionary, and the idea of anyone standing up to cancel culture and woke culture is going to sell tickets to his movie he's got coming out, etc. Like, he's trying to position this movie about George Floyd and last summer as the movie they don't want you to see, which is like, no, I would love to see that. That has nothing to do with the closer, because that all happened last, like, it's just disappointing. It's because, like, I feel like Dave is better than that. He doesn't have to go a reactionary route and do the Donald Trump thing where he does town halls and complains about how the mainstream media and corporations don't want to see him win. That is very beneath him, but maybe not. Somebody in a comment said that Dave's been making jokes about black people and crackheads his whole career, but now people mad because he's making jokes about trans people. And my challenge to that is, when have we been okay with non-black comedians making jokes about black people? You kind of see the imbalance there. Dave making jokes about his own people, which is still a problem on some levels, but you know, we'll get there. Him making jokes about his own people is very different than him making jokes about a whole different community that he doesn't belong to, that he doesn't understand. And you can tell he doesn't understand because his jokes are all based on stereotype. Generally speaking, you don't joke across certain cultural lines unless you really have a good joke or really understand that community. And Dave has neither. Dave's trans jokes are the equivalent to, you know, black jokes that white kids tell in the suburbs. They're based solely on stereotypes. There's chicken and watermelon jokes. That's what these jokes are the equivalent to. And it doesn't mean that they still can't be funny, but you can't say that they're not transgressive and offensive and mean and punching down. The most disappointing thing about Dave's whole response is this idea that he's not punching down based on some logic that he's made up, because I I don't know how. I don't know how he's trying to make that argument. And the reason why he doesn't understand it, and the biggest thing that, you know, made me want to make this video is because trans people, especially Black trans folks, don't really have a lot of representation in the media. They don't really have a lot of voices. They don't really have a lot of venues for you to understand or learn about their community. And so people are laughing at jokes about them that are just really harmful stereotypes. And that was really the biggest thing for me, was making a video that was about a community that I didn't belong to without any input from that community, to address the fact that I am speaking about a community that I don't belong to. And, you know, the fact that the voices and images of trans women, especially Black trans women, are generally not heard, haven't really been heard on this topic. I spoke to 3 Black trans folks to really just get their input and give them opportunity to like speak on their perception of what's happening, and with the perception of what people are getting wrong, and just, you know, things that I hope people hear and listen to, you know, recognize that this isn't just a group of overly sensitive people that just can't take a joke and want to control everything. These are people that have legitimate gripes and issues with the way Dave is addressing their community, the way Dave completely disregards some of them, to be honest, and the realities of how they have to go through society that Dave doesn't understand. And so it makes it really frustrating for them, who are fans, a lot of them, of Dave Chappelle, that he doesn't get it, and that most of y'all don't get it. So, you know, this is not about trans folks being overly sensitive or overreacting. This is about a community that, be honest, the most of you don't know anything about, wanting you to understand. And what I want as you go into this video is to go into it with the spirit of trying to understand, as opposed to just trying to maintain your position and your belief system and your viewpoint on the issue, to avoid feeling like you've done anything wrong, because you don't have to do that. This does not have to be a situation where it's a us or them thing, especially when the us is also us, if you get my point. Just listen. Just listen, y'all. It's literally the bare minimum at this point, and sadly the bare minimum is all folks are asking for, because that would be a huge difference than what a lot of trans folks are getting from everybody else. The last thing I want to point out here that is different from the last video is that there's a special announcement for all of my viewers and subscribers at the very end of the video. And so I want to make sure you stay there for that announcement. You may have noticed this video sponsored thing at the top. It's kind of a big deal, and I'm pretty proud of it. So please make sure that at the end you sit and you pay attention to what's going on, or you can just find it in the description already, but you'll get the idea. So that's it. So we're gonna jump right in to the video right about here.
And again, this isn't saying he can't make them or that Netflix should pull his show, but y'all need to understand that cancel culture is not when a large number of people don't like what you make and talk about it on Twitter. That's life. You aren't being canceled. You're an artist with a large audience, some of whom don't like what you do, and they're having discourse about it. On top of that, I cannot name a single person who's as famous as Dave Chappelle who's actually been canceled.
Okay, let's get one quick issue out the way. This isn't about cancel culture or canceling Dave Chappelle. In my opinion, you really can't cancel rich people. You can make them feel bad. You can bother them. You can maybe, you know, lessen their pockets a little bit, but you can't cancel them. It's highly unlikely that Netflix will take this special down, but even if they do, that won't even hit Dave's pockets. Dave already got paid for this. He will still be able to do shows and still find an audience. And I don't know, I'm frustrated that the cancel culture boogeyman has become such an easy response to whenever people get criticism, because that's what this is. Dave Chappelle isn't getting canceled. He's just being criticized, and he deserves it. The first important thing to remember when you understand that is you are not Dave Chappelle. You don't have to defend him. He can't even hear me in what I'm about to say. Like, I doubt this will ever make his eyes. He doesn't believe Twitter is a real place. Recognize that people are just hurt and upset, and you don't have to fight those people to tell them that they're wrong for how they feel on Dave's behalf. especially since he's clearly shown he doesn't care, which I don't know, maybe he does, because he dedicated an hour-long special that was 75% gay jokes in 2021. Like, y'all realize a woman put glue in her hair this year, a bunch of idiots tried to take over the government, like Dave didn't do one QAnon joke. Like, fam, how did we miss? That's what I was looking forward to. But no, we got 45 minutes of gay jokes. Those last 20 minutes. If there's one thing that's clear about Dave Chappelle in 2021 is that he has greatly built up his fuck it gene over the years. Dave Chappelle has been a comedian since he was 16 and was making waves since the early 90s. I don't know how being a comedian works, but it's clear that in that time frame early on, Dave Chappelle was pretty good and pretty successful and had a lot of opportunities from the jump.
2 years ago, he was in high school, working crowds like this for pocket change. Today, he has apartments in Los Angeles and New York, an agent, manager, a publicist, and no free time.
And this next part isn't a dig at Dave Chappelle, but a curious thing about that success early on is that Dave's original comedic comfort zone was appealing to very white audiences. Most black comedians that make it to Dave's level, I feel like they usually make it big in our circles before breaking out or crossing over. But Dave somehow skipped that part. And I think this is important for couching Dave's ethos, because Dave has been relatively wealthy and very successful pretty much since he was a teenager. And although Dave does have a significant understanding and empathy for black people and black issues, I don't think he's ever had the same lens of, say, a Cat Williams or an Eddie Griffin, which he might filter his comedy through, which gives it a different flavor, a different level of empathy. If you're a lifelong fan of Dave like myself, you know that early Dave Chappelle was probably a lot closer to Wayne Brady than he'd like to admit.
You guys notice Batman never fights crime in neighborhoods that need it. I mean, really, I would love to see Batman fight crime in my neighborhood. I can see now just Robin. Yes, Batman. Didn't we park the car right here, man?
His comedy was much safer and much less critical of his white audiences in the 90s until the early 2000s. And so the absence of this black texture sometimes probably means that Dave's had more engagement with white LGBTQ people than black LGBTQ people for most of his life and career. Dave Chappelle grew up in white communities, married a non-black woman, lives in a rural white community in Ohio, performed mostly for white or mixed audiences his whole career, and has been relatively rich since early for most of his life. So if you kind of get what I'm saying here, it stands to reason, considering Dave's ethos as we understand it through his comedy, that not only does he not have the strongest connection to black LGBTQ people, that maybe he's also been through some things in the comedy world that makes him a little bit sensitive to the type of art and work he's putting in at this point in his career versus the stuff he may have been forced to do early in his career.
Time out! Excuse me, bad guys. I am running out of air. Gotta get pumped.
Well, Dave, hi.
Hello.
Well, now, isn't this cozy? You two lounging in the bed while the help makes coffee.
That's right, Miss Daisy.
I won't call his early acting career buffoonery, right? But it's edge in there. He was definitely cast as the sassy black guy more than a few times before starring in Half Baked, and then eventually he got to have his big breakthrough with the Chappelle Show. With Chappelle Show, Dave would reach a level of stardom that comedians hadn't seen since like the 80s. For young millennials and slightly older Gen Xers, his comedy struck a perfect nerve of irreverence, absurdity, and insight for a time period that seemed to be getting increasingly insane. And I won't spend a lot of time on the unique impact of Chappelle Show. T1J has a few great videos analyzing that show and how it holds up, and so I'll also leave that in the description. But the thing I want to bring up Chappelle Show for was that big dramatic ending or canceling or whatever it was. If you were there and you were following it and then you followed the aftermath, what you know is that Dave left a $50 million contract on the table and had it kind of taken away from him because he was just done with doing the show. He was first and foremost overwhelmed by his celebrity status. Like I said, he's been successful in Hollywood, but he hadn't been a true star. And now he was a mega star. And it was messing with his ability to do his job, to participate in the art form that he sees as comedy.
Watching out for the media. I'm like Bigfoot, nigga. When people see me, they freak the fuck out. Oh, shit. Even other celebrities get surprised and see me. Oh, shit. Hey, thanks. Come on, you only got 10 minutes. God damn.
Moreover, and more importantly for this video, Dave describes the fact that at a certain point, he wasn't sure if he was comfortable with the jokes he was making. He was starting to realize a complex issue, one that I am currently grappling with myself, something that I think Foreign Man tackles excellently in his video on the commodification of N, that there's a weird headspace you have to be in as a black entertainer of a white audience. This is yet another topic for a future video, but in short, there's an innate sense of dread that black entertainers have to grapple with due to the history of white commodification of black art and black bodies. And you have to be very careful to tread a line of creating content or art that people consume or becoming the product yourself. You have to constantly negotiate whether or not the audience sees you as an entertainer or the entertainment, if they get your jokes or if they think you're a joke. So at a certain point during the filming of the 3rd season of Chappelle's show, Dave had a moment where it became clear to him that his white audience wasn't getting the joke. And his work no longer felt funny, it felt exploitative.
Like there's this one sketch we did that was about this pixie that would appear whenever racist things happens. Whenever someone make you feel like they calling you that N-word. It was a good spirit or intention behind it. But what I didn't consider is how many people watch the show and how the way people use television is subjective. Then when I'm on the set and we're finally taping the sketch, somebody on the set that was white laughed in such a way. I know the difference of people laughing with me and people laughing at me. And it was the first time I'd ever gotten a laugh that I was uncomfortable with. These people be watching TV. That there's a lot of people who will understand exactly what I'm doing. Then there's another group of people who are just fans, like the kind of people that scream, "I'm Rick James," be at my concerts.
Yeah.
That they're along for a different kind of celebrity worship ride. They're gonna get something
completely different.
Completely different.
Yeah.
They're concerned.
Yeah.
I don't want black people to be disappointed in me for putting that out there.
No, you didn't want to be disappointed in yourself.
You know what, Oprah? You're right.
Yeah.
To me, this experience and worldview and the fact that that happened is really the key tragedy of this situation. It's abundantly clear, especially from Dave's comedy post-Chappelle show, that Dave has an amazing insight on the nuances of navigating the world as an oppressed minority, specifically from his standpoint as a black man. He understands the nature of how one's oppressed identity can be comedic, but also exploited for comedy. And when he felt it happening to him, he refused to stand for it. Do you see where this is going? Fast forward and Chappelle disappeared from the public eye for over a decade, not really turning back up until 2016 with an appearance on Saturday Night Live the weekend after Donald Trump won the presidency. And then right after that, he signed a deal with Netflix to do however many comedy specials, and The Closer was the last one. But from the very beginning, we start getting into trouble. See, when he came back after this, I think more than a decade-long hiatus, Chappelle was different. He looked different. He had clearly gotten into fitness and health and had put on a kind of surprising amount of muscle in the intervening years. He was also a bit slower and more serious in his delivery. Something about the experience of not just leaving Chappelle's show, but $50 million had solidified something within Dave that was like, fuck it, I'm not doing anything I don't want to do. If I had to make an assumption, it's that Chappelle decided that if he was going to come back, it would only to be exactly who he wants to be as an entertainer. It would be to do jokes that did not make him uncomfortable and left no room for him to feel like he was the joke. It would be to speak his unfiltered truth and take no shit about it. It would mean that if he was going to put himself out there, you were going to pay him and shut the fuck up about it, and that nobody was going to get the best of him again for setting boundaries that he needs for himself, that he requires for his art and talent. Like, think about it for a second that Dave lives in not just Ohio, but rural Ohio. And I just happen to have a homeboy from Ohio, and I've been to this area. It is the sticks. There's a dairy farm that sells awesome ice cream and cheese curds down the street from Dave Chappelle's house. Meanwhile, every other comedian is either in New York or LA, because that's where the money and work is. That's where like the activity is. But because Dave values his autonomy and his privacy, he's in a place where nobody can get to him. Also very far from other black people. Just pointing that out. In Equanimity and the Bird Paradox or something, I can't remember the name of it, he kind of regales this story, but he describes it through an Iceberg Slim parable, which positions him, Dave Chappelle, as the prostitute, as the hoe in this situation. And he feels that that's what happened to him at Comedy Central. He feels that's what happened to him for his $50 million check. And it's clear that that informs pretty much everything he does from this point on. So what's going on, y'all? This is me speaking to you once again from the editing bay for what may possibly be several addendum sections to this video, because this video is very complex. I wanted to make sure that I drove home from this particular section that the goal of this video, and I think the overall criticism of Dave Chappelle, isn't to cancel him. And that to an extent, Dave Chappelle cannot be canceled. His career trajectory that I just described up until this point has positioned him both in the culture and in his head as a person who is just not going to abide by the expectations and parameters that comedians or actors or whatever are supposed to be set by. Chappelle has already went through a stage in his career where he felt like people controlled what he did and said. And if you know his career and if you listen to him talk over the course of the years, both in his comedy and in interviews, if there's one thing Chappelle does not like, it is control. On the flip side, canceling is not absent of consequence. So if a consequence of doing comedy that people find offensive is that they don't want to see your show, or they don't want your shows to be on Netflix, or they don't want to screen your movie at their film festival, like that's the opposite side to that type of integrity that Dave Chappelle champions in his work. And what I think is frustrating for all groups, because I don't think, at least the trans folks I've talked to, they're not saying that Chappelle isn't and has never been funny. They're not saying that there's not jokes you can make about trans people that are humorous or amusing and that they did not laugh at the show, although I'm sure some didn't. But what they're saying is, hey, a lot of this stuff is offensive. It's now a pattern. You don't know what you're talking about. And we are now going to divest and work with our community to divest from what you're doing. And if Chappelle has as much integrity as he presents, he'll be okay with that. We sound so much like other people when the shoe is on the other foot. This isn't about freedom of speech. Nobody's stopping Chappelle from saying what he wants to say, but it's also not about freedom from consequences. And if a consequence, as Chappelle has shown he's able to take in the past, of not wanting to do certain types of jokes or work means that he loses opportunities, that's it.
Cancel culture is not real. It is. I know that you like to pretend it's some type of organized boycott of a person or a company or something like that. But it isn't. It's just random people who don't like the thing and don't want to support the thing, and they're just loud about it on Twitter, which is life. That's just criticism. I don't think it's anything special or different. I do take issue with the whole cancel culture thing because now people have a way to just pretend that any criticism or any public shaming is cancel culture, and then they get to use that to essentially hide from criticism.
Put a pin in that for a second. Let's get into the actual joke. So in his first special for Netflix, he has a section where he goes into, just some general kind of crass, edgy LGBTQ based jokes, and then eventually to Caitlyn Jenner. And to be fair, it's standard offensive humor. Dave is a consistent user of a technique called crossing the line twice. Crossing the line twice is where a joke's humor is based in the fact that the comedian or whomever is saying or doing something so far over the line that it becomes funny. For example, there's a long history of comedians making gay jokes. And for the most part, the punchlines for these jokes is the simple fact that a man is acting gay. Being gay, that's the joke. Here's an example of one from Dave's earliest appearances on Def Comedy Jam.
Man, look. There goes some gay guys. Hey, look, there goes some more hood kissing. Hey, what the fuck, man?
When you look at a lot of humor aimed at marginalized groups, that's really what the joke often is. We're just supposed to laugh at the very existence of these marginalized people because they're different and the behavior is weird to us. And this is, that's easy, low-hanging fruit. And this is what people often refer to as punching down. When you, from a place of privilege, make a joke about a marginalized group, where the joke is mostly just to make fun of something about that group's experience. But Dave didn't do that, of course. He hates punching down. So what Chappelle does is, instead of really punching down, he crosses the line twice. So he makes the joke about a particular group, but it's so egregious or absurd or silly that it paradoxically becomes funny. It crosses the line you're not supposed to cross, and it just keeps going until it circles back around again into being funny, where you're not really thinking about negative opinions or attitudes about the group that's being targeted by the joke. You're probably just thinking about how silly it is that somebody might believe what's being said. And if the comedian is skilled enough, we might even learn something about the target of the joke that we didn't before. And this joke is super popular with Chappelle and many of his contemporary comedians who use edgy humor. And your mileage may vary, but as a child of the 90s, that tactic, that technique is right up my alley. And for an example of this, before he gets to Caitlyn Jenner, Dave sets his sight on his wife's male gay friends, and he starts with the usual LOL, being gay is funny stuff. But then he takes it to absurdity. He compares his wife's gay friends to a cat that can talk.
She has a lot of gay friends. And I don't like them. Not because they're gay, I'm just judging them on the merits of their character. They're just not nice dudes. They're fucking rude house guests. They're sitting on my couch, giggling with my wife, eating my motherfucking macaroons. And I come in, they act like the party's over. Hey, Stuart, what's going on? This guy talks to me the way a cat would speak if a cat could talk. Hi, David.
So here the punchline stops being explicitly about a man being gay and him being different and that being funny, and becomes the absurdity of what a cat might sound like if he can talk. Now, I'm not saying no one should feel offended or targeted by these types of jokes. The offensive nature of these types of jokes is a core part of them. But I want to point out that the technique, when done right, usually disarms those people from feeling like they're being truly made fun of. Maybe made uncomfortable, but not targeted. And because he's been so good at this, Dave is a master practitioner, a master storyteller. He's never really been criticized for this type of humor because people are willing to give it a pass. And I'm pointing this out because this is kind of the first bullshit argument that people make to excuse the problem with this special, is that why are people mad at Dave for saying this but not that? And it's because when he says something about that, like for instance, the joke he made about being molested by a Catholic priest, it's so ridiculous and extreme that it's just funny. Still offensive, but the offense is dissipated by the fact that this joke is that outrageous. The target of that joke is the Catholic Church, somebody who definitely can't be punched down to by Dave Chappelle, and Chappelle himself. So there's no way to punch down there. But punching down is kind of what happens here when he gets to his trans jokes. At a certain point in the closers, Chappelle explicitly talks about the concept of punching down and how out of all the criticism he's gotten, this is the one that bothers him the most. He rejects the idea that punching down is what he's doing and argues that in order to punch down, you have to think lesser of the group you're making a joke about. And this is the most dishonest and disingenuous I've seen Dave until he gets to the last 20 minutes of this show. George Carlin has a great quote about punching down in his criticism of Andrew Dice Clay from probably the early 90s at this point. Carlin is a long-standing star at the time in the comedy world, with the core of his humor being aimed up at oppressive global systems, conservative systems, etc. But on the flip side, Clay had risen to megastardom with an act that was almost completely dependent on jokes about minorities, women, immigrants, and gay people.
I would defend to the death his right to do everything he does. The thing that I find unusual, and it's, you know, it's not a criticism so much, but his targets are underdogs. And comedy traditionally has picked on people in power, people who abuse their power. Women and gays and immigrants are kind of, to my way of thinking, underdogs. Actually, he should do what he wants, and...
Why does he get away with it, do you think, then?
Well,
we have never laughed at jokes about the
Well,
poor.
he's appealing, I think he's appealing largely. I think his core audience are young white males who are threatened by these groups. I think a lot of these guys aren't sure of their manhood, because that's a problem when you're going through adolescence. You know, am I really? Could I be? I hope I'm not one of them. And the women who assert themselves and are competent are a threat to these men, and so are immigrants in terms of jobs and the
So that's why we as an audience then will laugh.
You say we, I don't think you're
no,
but I think you're
collective we.
I think that's what is at the core of that experience that takes place in these arenas.
And what Clay did worked because, as Carlin said, and this is an important point, he spoke to the insecurities of a society that was indifferent or fearful of change that was happening at the time. A group of people that maybe felt like their place or their level of power was being reduced by the emergence of these new social forces and factors that they didn't agree upon and didn't have any power over.
I don't see too many in Philly, you know. Out in L.A., Manhattan, you got them all over the place. Brooklyn, we don't have any gay people. They're all dead.
And Clay's work could never survive today. Like, was offensive for even its time. But at least Clay was honest. He went head first into his offensiveness. That was his act, being this offensive douchebag. But Dave, very disappointingly, tries to maintain the high ground. And worse yet, he's trying to pretend that he knows, understands, and empathizes with trans people over and over again in this special and other specials. But at the same time, in like a joke later, he'll say he doesn't understand and he doesn't know. And his jokes prove that. They prove that he doesn't really know what trans people have to deal with. And the fact that he's so comfortable and really condescending with these treatises and arguments he's putting in between his comedy,
comedy. I think offensive comedy, so to speak, is fine, but offensive comedy and bigoted comedy are two different things. And I think that there were ways that Dave could have made jokes as it relates to being trans that would have been funny, because being trans is, like, it's funny. Like, it is. Not like the entire existence itself, but there are things that to be made fun of that could genuinely be funny, but you have to understand it. And Dave doesn't understand it. He doesn't get it. So it's not really his place to make those jokes, because, like, he's not educated enough.
It implicates a clear lack of knowledge and understanding for the audience he's targeting. And what that translates to, despite Dave's best intentions, which, you know, everybody's come out and said he didn't mean to do any harm, he just doesn't cross the line a second time. And the comedy is just, LOL, look at trans people. In the original set with the jokes about Caitlyn Jenner, Dave does a segment about a trans executive who walked into a meeting room and threw her severed penis on the table. And this joke almost crosses the line twice, but it relies not on a unique insight into the trans experience or trans people, but on a false stereotype of trans women that Dave and I imagine most cis people have.
Yeah, and we back. So in this section right here, I kind of lost my way, just, you know, ranting off the cuff about issues that I know through books and through, you know, information, but not through experience and not through enough connectivity and conversation with trans people. So I was like, you know what, we're gonna cut this, because but the overall goal here is to point out that pretty much all of Chappelle's jokes about trans women depend on stereotypes about what he thinks trans women are, stereotypes that most people believe about trans women. Specifically, the joke about the CEO that cut off her penis evokes this idea that all trans women go through gender affirmation surgery. which is just something that's not true. The majority of women do not get that surgery. And it really just goes to show the, lack of knowledge and, empathy for that community from Chappelle's standpoint, that he's making a joke about something explicitly barred from the vast majority of these women. And he's not doing it because he understands or because he knows or because he cares, as he tries to allude to at different times in the special. He's doing it because it's an easy joke to make about a community that you don't know or don't care about, that most of the audience doesn't know or care about. And that's the epitome of punching down. That is exactly what punching down is. So, and I'm pretty sure I'll circle back to this later on in the video, but the whole I'm not punching down thing doesn't work. And then when you combine it with Dave's, positioning himself as a truth teller and, to have some type of grand thing to say in this special, it really makes it even more frustrating. But I'll get to that later in the video.
This is the ugly, dangerous area Dave's playing in without knowing the information. And even still, even with the jokes being pretty tired, tame, lame jokes that have been done about trans people for decades now, I have heard over and over again many trans women say that it's not that the trans jokes can't be made or can't be funny, it's just that they depend solely on these stereotypes. And the real frustration here is how cowardly Dave Chappelle is being to try to throw these rocks and hide his hand. Being brave enough to make the trans jokes, but whining about getting criticized for it. It would be a bold-faced lie for me to come and say that I don't like Dave Chappelle and don't find him funny in all of his offensiveness, and this includes many of his jokes about trans and LGBTQ people as a whole. You cannot control what you laugh at. You can only control if you decide to laugh. And I'm a child of the 90s, like I said, edgy humor, that's my baseline understanding of what is funny. I watched stuff like Liquid Television as a kid. I'm dead inside.
It's worse than having an alien living in your head. How about trying to save the world at the same time by fending off a fiendish army of evil parasitic aliens? What do I have to do with all this?
And I'm sorry for anybody that's disappointed by that. But at the same time, the difference here is I'm not gonna act like these jokes are not harmful because I laughed out of them, because the crowd laughs. I'm not going to give myself a pass on my sense of humor by trying to hide the reality of what I find humorous. And I feel, or at least I hope, that this is what a lot of people are doing. Folks don't want to own their participation in a harmful act. No one wants to admit they're doing something wrong. Everybody wants to be good at the end of the day. But all we're doing is gaslighting trans people to make it seem like they're the person responsible for their own issues that they're facing in the world. When you throw rocks like these and then hide your hands, you're contributing to the type of energy and movement that makes these bills possible all the same. But Chappelle helps codify this. One of the comments that made me know I was gonna have to make this is that over and over again in Twitter, Facebook, and just looking at the media, I kept hearing after people watch this special, Dave Chappelle the GOAT. Dave Chappelle got it, man. Dave Chappelle the GOAT is the greatest of all time. And that may be true, but it's not because of this special. And definitely not because he said something deep or profound about trans people. Chappelle tries to make a statement about empathizing with the shared humanity and shared minority experiences of trans people, and says he won't make any more trans jokes until he's sure that they're laughing together. Oh. But for the entirety of the special, he validates the worst takes and opinions and stereotypes of trans people to his audience and guarantees that despite his goal of showing the shared humanity, the biggest takeaway from the special will be the continued inhumane treatment of trans people. And the easiest and most obvious criticism here is the fact that in all these trans jokes, Dave, who is supposedly this for the people type dude that's been talking about black issues since, for 20 years now, doesn't mention trans black people at all throughout the entire special.
It's frustrating because Dave Chappelle is clearly not educated enough on trans issues to be having all these hot takes. He knows literally nothing. It feels like I'm talking to a child. Just because you're a black man and you understand a black man's oppression does not make you qualified to speak on every minority issue, especially when you exclude black people from the conversation in a way that feels incredibly intentional, because he talks about black gay people but never black trans people. And it's because if he acknowledges black trans people, his whole joke falls apart.
He leaves out talking about black trans people because he can't claim to be the victim and then have to look at his own people. Black LGBTQ people are by far the most vulnerable people involved in this conversation, but he doesn't talk about them. He spends over an hour making jokes about LGBTQ people and never brings up the perilous situation that black trans women especially are in. And this brings up one of the more frustrating and complex issues of the ongoing conflict, which is that Dave Chappelle is legit trying to win the oppression Olympics.
Although Dave Chappelle, the black American, he was a little jealous. I was like, how the fuck are transgender people beating black people in the discrimination Olympics? If the police shot half as many transgenders as they did niggas last year, it'd be a fucking war in LA.
Dave jokes in an earlier special that he is jealous that LGBTQ people and trans people have surpassed black people in the oppression Olympics. And this is a pretty funny joke until you realize that Dave is not joking. He's dead fucking serious. As far as I can tell, Dave Chappelle unironically feels justified in his criticism of trans people because trans people have managed to have an ostensibly more effective path to equality and protection than black people have in a shorter amount of time. Now, I'm tempted to point out how this is greatly a false view of reality, and also point out that for every advantage or advancement that LGBTQ people have gained, black LGBTQ people are still greatly excluded from those advancements because they are black. But if I really went into all of that, I'd be still playing the oppression Olympics for real, just like Dave Chappelle does. So instead, I'm going to try to explain why this is such a bad and, to be honest, dumb thing that marginalized people get caught up on all the time. But first, I do want to engage with the points that Dave tries to make here. Chappelle enters into discussion, can a gay person be racist? To which he is met with a resounding yes, and this is of course true. He speaks later in what my opinion is a very true statement about white LGBTQ people, which is that they have the option to vacillate between minority status and protected status as white people. There are legitimate reasons for black people to take issues with gay white community. For example, upperly mobile gay home buyers are some of the leading pioneers of gentrification across the United States over the last 10 to 15 years. And they build gay enclaves in poor black neighborhoods, and often in the process weaponize their whiteness to use legal and economic systems to put black working class people out of their communities. I also go on record to point out that it's at least reasonable to look at what happened to Kevin Hart as a little unfair. Hart's situation with the Oscar wars and nearly a decade of old tweets is a bit iffy in that I imagine if 10-year-old ugly statements are the standard for canceling and protests, then there's a lot of people that need to be missing out on opportunities, myself included. And it felt like Kevin was being unfairly targeted for these mistakes and issues that almost every comedian in existence older than 30 would have to own up to. And so yes, Kevin technically wasn't canceled. He chose to give up on the opportunity, but I understand him just having a bad taste in his mouth, feeling like he didn't do anything different than most other people in his situation from his era and got extra scrutiny for it. And I don't think it would have happened to a white comedian because I can't think of too many examples of that happening to white comedians. At the same time, though, Hart still serves as a really useful way to look at the problem because however long after that, he had that weird exchange with Lil Nas X on an episode of HBO's Barbershop.
And with all that early success, you felt it was important to make an announcement recently.
He said he was gay, so what?
Yeah, what's the point? So why did he feel that was necessary? It's not about who cares. That's actually my question. Why do you feel it was necessary to come out and say that?
It's not that like it's like being forced. It's just like knowing, like growing up, like I'm grown up to hate this shit. I'm not supposed to ever like this.
Hate what? Hate what?
Homosexuality, gay people. Come on now.
Why are you going to
If you're really from the hood, you know.
Now, again, it's plausible that this was maybe edited to make it look worse than it was. And Hart does try to clarify, kinda, that he was trying to get across this point of just everybody needs to just not worry about this other stuff and keep pushing forward. But in making this point, Hart, just like Chappelle, is doing something that he wouldn't want anybody doing to him as a black man. Nobody wants their oppressed identity to be minimized and to be disregarded on how that affects what they're doing. But I do feel like there's a lot of black people, like we have this, you know, there's different theories on whether or not black people are more homophobic than anyone else. And I don't have good data on that. I've seen research that supports that argument. I've seen research that says that's definitely not true. But what I do think is true is that the nature of homophobia is very much confounded by the black experience and our understanding of our own identity as oppressed people. And that makes us say things like what Chappelle is doing here and like what Kevin Hart is doing. It makes us want to win the Olympics of oppression. And it makes it harder to engage with and validate the oppressed identities of other people because it feels like somehow we're losing as these other groups make strides for progress that seem barred from us. And I want to be clear, there's a valid reason for this anxiety with black people. The reality is that anti-blackness has been a fuel for the progress of other marginalized groups for a long time. And you can find examples of this all throughout American history. The women's suffrage movement used anti-black rhetoric to advance the right for women to vote, but only white women. Margaret Sanger, founder of Planned Parenthood, partially built her movement for women's reproductive rights off of the support for eugenics and sterilization of women of color. There's a long-standing conflict between black people and often South and East Asian immigrants who engage in exploitative economic practices that hurt black communities right now. You may have heard of Rachel Dolezal from a few years back, the white woman who posed as a black woman for scholarships and other reasons that I don't get. But how many of you have heard of VJ Chokalingam, the younger brother of actress and comedian Mindy Kaling? And so what this dude did is, after not trying that hard in school for most of his life, when he wanted to go to college, he posed as a black male to try to get access to scholarships that weren't reserved for him. And when he got them and got caught, he then came back and said, see, this is an example of why affirmative action is a bad thing. Black people have had a history of experiences of other minorities using a preferred minority status to usurp or do harm to us, or as Dave Chappelle insinuates, being a minority and collaborating with us until the opportunity presents itself to disengage. And in my view, no two groups are more guilty of this than the white-dominated feminist and LGBTQ movements and how they persistently exclude black women and black queer people when it's too inconvenient for them to be included.
The issues that black people, and more specifically LGBTQ black people, have with white LGBTQ people, I think that it actually has nothing to do with queerness, in my opinion. I think that the non-black people that want to be racist to black people exist in and outside of queerness. In every single one of those is non-black people that are racist against black people. And I think that it is, it's an issue outside of queerness.
Like, Dave kind of had a point and really could have made a point had he taken the time to understand the problem. White queer people are very, very racist. And because they're no different from other white people. They're still white. Just because you're queer doesn't mean that you're not white. And white queer people don't take the time to, like, reckon with their whiteness. They just don't. It's like, it's the same problems that you see white people have with, like, black people, like, straight society. You know, they call the cops and get black people killed. Queerness is like, it has this association with whiteness because the only people that are uplifted really, like, as queer are white people, and they're not turning around and platforming black queer people, and not even like in like a YouTube or on video or anything. Like, they don't turn around and stand up against, like, racism, or, you know, they don't use their visibility as a way to shine a light over our direction. They just kind of soak it up and they're happy to move on.
And I haven't touched on trans issues too much explicitly, but, you know, the queer community has notable figures like Jeffree Star and Nikita Dragon and others who persistently employ harmful language and rhetoric and throw black queer people under the bus. It's a well-known thing in these communities that white gays constantly censor their own needs and minimize the needs and issues of their black counterparts. And it shows up in the data around poverty, HIV transmission, employment, and of course, bigoted violence. And if I wanted to, I could deep dive into this to try to make a further point for the video, but Dave Chappelle didn't. He didn't bring up any of this shit. And this is low-hanging fruit. If he had talked to anybody about this, somebody would have told him this, but he doesn't bring that up. Margaret Sanger, Ed Buck, none of that. He barely mentions black queer people at all.
Dave just completely like erased our existence, I guess, because he frames transness as this like white people thing, failing to consider that we like, and I think the thing that really upsets me the most about it is that the erasure happens both like rhetorically and literally, right? And when I say this, I'm not saying that I think black men are any more transphobic than any other group, because I don't think that's true. So when we're killed, when black trans women are killed, it is by black men. And that's what I mean when like the erasure happens both literally and like rhetorically. Like Dave pretends that we don't exist, but then at the same time we are literally getting like unexisted by our own community. It's clear to me that Dave doesn't know what he's talking about, or if he does, he purposefully left out black trans women, knowing that we would ruin all of his quote-unquote jokes.
And that's frustrating because Dave definitely alludes to the fact that he recognizes that it's the power of whiteness that has greatly carried the so-called gay agenda, especially the power of white gay men. And it's important to be critical of that. But what Chappelle completely glosses over is that black queer people are doubly screwed over by the centering of whiteness in the social movements of queer people and how they get left out of the equation when it's most critical. And it's this same logic that being gay or trans or queer is a white thing that serves as fuel for Dave and other like-minded black folks to situate the LGBTQ community as some type of enemy of black people. That being gay or being queer is some white people shit, which completely erases so many black folks, but clearly some of y'all are very comfortable doing that. So here I am one last time, hopefully to, drive this last point home. The thing I want to get across here is that I get where Chappelle is coming from in terms of this feeling of jealousy and animosity and, nihilism at other people's struggle in the face of your own. And that as black men, we are so surrounded by death, so surrounded by indifference to our condition, that many of us as a defense mechanism have adopted this attitude of, well, if folks ain't gonna care about black people and black lives and black bodies and black men, then I'm not gonna care about them. And if that was just the case, I don't think people would really be up in arms. But the extension of that is that there's so many brothers, and this is sisters too, by the way, but there's so many black folks in general that because our condition is so bad, we think it gives us license to pile on to other people, to punch down on other people in other groups when the opportunity presents itself. And then we get mad and indignant when people criticize us for that. And it's like, just like being gay doesn't give you carte blanche to be racist, being black doesn't give you carte blanche to be homophobic or transphobic. And like Anansi talks about in their video, touches on the whole thing with DaBaby and how you can't, this argument that DaBaby got into worse trouble for hurting a gay person's feelings than killing a black man is such a bullshit argument to try to pull out there, because number one, the courts found that DaBaby acted in self-defense. Please recognize there's a lot of niggas in jail for lesser charges. DaBaby situation is very much an outlier. And like, are we ready to talk about the fact that DaBaby's fan base is not heterosexual black men, that we are not protecting DaBaby and we're not uncanceling DaBaby. DaBaby's uncanceled by a lot of the same fan base that he insulted on that stage. So he's fine. That's just how it works when you're DaBaby. That's a role that black men are allowed to embody regardless of the negative things that we participate in. But Chappelle's not going to get into all that. He wants to create this narrative of black people versus gay people instead of black people versus white supremacy, which is the real issue here. So I get where this sense of jealousy comes from. I get why it's a thing, but that doesn't make it right. That doesn't give you a real strong argument to deflect criticism when you participate in harmful things towards other groups of people. Our oppression is not the product of those people's activity. So we cannot attack them on that basis. We need to be engaging with those folks effectively, because we can do two things at once. We can talk about the fact that these other groups benefit from and exploit black energy and bodies to promote their own social justice, but we can also not participate in their oppression just because we have the opportunity to. So let's talk about these last 20 minutes. And this was getting low, so we're going to go ahead and just have this queued up, and I may just have this in my hand. Chappelle's been making trans jokes for 5-6 years now. And trans people have complained, but overall, they just kept it pushing. And they've done that, I think, because at the end of the day, the one thing I've learned about trans people in my engagement with trans folks through work and now especially on YouTube is that they tend to keep it real in a different type of way. They have an energy that Chappelle speaks on. When you recognize the world is aligned against you, you're not going to waste a lot of time whining and complaining about bullshit when you got like real shit going on. It's Tuesday, if you get the reference. But what Chappelle does here is worse than just make offensive jokes. He tries to make it seem like he's doing some type of grand sermon about these issues that is going to be seen by millions of people and influence millions of people's ideas and attitudes towards trans people. And the fact that trans people don't get to speak for themselves most of the time, that's the scary part for them. That now it's not just, oh, people are making jokes about me, but now the most well-known ideologies about trans people came from a comedian who clearly doesn't understand what the fuck we're doing and what the fuck we're going through. And that's fucking scary.
And what I hate is that irritating white trans people don't consider black trans people in this conversation either. They're complaining about Dave Chappelle and at the same time not including the main voices who have actual grievances with his jokes. Black trans women and black women in general are the main ones getting the backlash for coming out against him. And it needs to be said that what Dave is really doing here, probably unknowingly, is helping in the renormalization of transphobia in the workplace and in society in general.
Dave Chappelle sets to tell the trans community, a community he doesn't belong to and knows very little about outside of his two trans friends, the truth about themselves, that they're the real bullies and that they're the cause of their own problems. Now, just me saying that out loud should set off red flags in your head. In what world has this been a real thing? That a member of an outside and often antagonistic community is the person who really knows the truth and what's wrong with those people and why they have it so hard. He starts out defending J.K. Rowling and then calling himself a TERF.
Cancel J.K. Rowling. My God, J.K. Rowling wrote all the Harry Potter books by herself. They canceled her because she said in an interview, and this is not exactly what she said, but effectually, she said gender was a fact. And then the trans community got mad as shit. They started calling her a TERF. I didn't even know what the fuck that was. I'm Team TERF. I agree. I agree, man. Gender is a fact.
For Dave Chappelle to call himself a TERF and defend J.K. Rowling would be like defending David Duke and calling yourself Team KKK. In more ways than one, there's significant crossover between TERFs, trans exclusionary radical feminists, and actual fascism and neo-Nazis. The first books that Nazis burned were books about healthcare and transsexuality. Notable TERFs in Europe, where this issue is much more prominent, are pretty chummy with white supremacists. And when you look at the discourse surrounding Dave Chappelle as it pertains to TERFs, you start to see figures that's like, Dave, is this who you want to run with? Is this your folks? This your folks now?
Stands for trans exclusionary radical feminists. This is a real thing. This is a group of women that hate transgender. They don't hate transgender women. That hate transgender. They don't hate transgender women. They don't hate transgender women.
Trans exclusionary radical feminists don't just disagree with trans people. They hate trans people.
And they don't hate transgender women.
They stalk trans people. They harass trans people. They commit acts of violence towards trans people. This is a incredibly insensitive and dangerous thing for Dave Chappelle to do. I won't go that far into what Rowling did herself. ContraPoints does a great video on this, but it's more than just saying gender is real. What J.K. Rowling did was on record imply that trans men were secretly sexual predators and spoke explicitly in support of the type of bathroom laws that were passed in North Carolina. The same laws that Dave Chappelle himself says are cruel and inhumane. She constantly addresses trans people as being either sick or mentally ill or treats them like children. And as a final cherry on top of all of this, when this is going on, she wrote a book under a pen name. And this book, which is not, labeled under J.K. Rowling, is a more adult book. And in this book, the main antagonist is a cross-dressing serial killer who uses his identity as a trans woman to spy on female victims in bathrooms before killing them.
That hate transgender. They don't hate transgender women. They don't hate transgender women.
J.K. Rowling didn't get canceled for saying gender is real. Rich people don't get canceled. But the trans people and LGBTQ community turned away from J.K. Rowling because they realized that J.K. Rowling hates trans people. That's why she got canceled.
And they don't hate transgender women, but they look at trans women the way we blacks might look at blackface. It offends them.
Then he talked about the comment of TERF thinking that trans women are basically like using blackface. And this is actually a reference to a direct quote. And I'm going to read the whole thing and you tell me if it sounds like a person who just disagrees with trans women. You are fucking blackface actors. This is a white woman, by the way, but go off. You are fucking blackface actors. You aren't women. You're men who get sexual kicks from being treated like women. Fuck you and your dirty fucking perversions. Our oppression isn't a fetish, you pathetic, sick fuck. By the way, this is a woman that J.K. Rowling openly supported.
And they don't hate transgender women.
They don't hate transgender women. Do I have to explain how stupid of a comment this is, both for this woman and for Dave Chappelle, to act like white men in a period well before black people had any rights or equality put on a black face to dance around and make fun of black people and then immediately took it off to go back to doing white people shit, versus trans women who live as trans women their whole lives, or as long as they're able to do it, who deal with discrimination, depression, higher rates of suicide, higher rates of unemployment, and higher likelihood to be murdered. Do I have to explain why that doesn't work, Dave?
Gender is a fact. This is a fact. Every human being in this room, every human being on earth had to pass through the legs of a woman to be on earth. That is a fact.
Dave goes on to say that gender is a fact, and this is true, but Dave is making the very classic mistake of thinking gender is the same thing as sex or sexuality. And I'm going to explain this briefly. I know a lot of folks watching this probably know this, but I also know a lot of people have not heard this and do not understand it. So this is going to be oversimplification, but just follow me for a second. So there are three things. There's gender, sex, and sexuality. Sex is biological. It's what you're born with between your legs. You get assigned one of two sexes at birth, male or female, because you either have two X chromosomes or two Y chromosomes. Now, of course, there's lots of stuff in between, but we're just keeping it simple. Gender is not biological. It is sociological and thus is subject to change. But the thing about gender is that it changes over time and has throughout society. What makes a man or a woman is based solely upon the opinions of the culture that dictates. In the Renaissance, it was fashionable for men to wear high heels. In Korea, men wear makeup. And Dave Chappelle himself joked about how in the Philippines, there's a complete reversal of gender roles based on the economics of that nation. Gender is real, but it's subject to whatever we want it to be. And thus it is capable of changing, but sex does not, and no one's trying to do that. No trans people think that they are somehow changing their DNA when they change their name or take hormones. No trans woman thinks that they will birth children or have periods. Nobody's trying to take that special role away from women who are born female. The Caitlyn Jenner Woman of the Year thing was a media stunt. And even still, that's a one-time, very rare thing, as are all the problems that keep floating around social media about trans girls in high school sports. The reality is that the threat that trans women pose to cis women is mostly a made-up problem created by TERFs. There's something that people latch onto to fuel their bigotry. Even like, we talk about the trans women in high school, right? Like, y'all know a trans woman competed at the Olympics this past year in weightlifting and lost. Didn't just lose, didn't even make the cut.
I don't know. And I think like the thing that everyone really misses about like black trans women or trans women in general is like we're not trying to like redefine anything. We're not trying to change the definition of woman. We're not trying to threaten anyone's existence. Like, dude, I just want to be able to get on the bus and not have to worry about fighting someone for fucking wearing a skirt or makeup. It's insane. It's a lot of people talk about the fear that comes with being trans in public, but I don't think they understand the profound levels that is felt by black trans women. I don't really care if you know, like, if you understand my existence that much. Just like, let me live.
And then Dave brings up his trans friend, Daphne, God rest her soul. And this is where I knew I had to say something, because I knew to the uncritical and the bias that those looking for confirmation of their suspicions and unease about the growing presence of trans people and their increased visibility in the country, that they were going to see this bullshit artist story as some type of grand statement where Dave really said the quiet thing out loud and gave a voice to issues in a way that they couldn't. This is what earned Dave his standing ovation and the countless Facebook statuses and tweets that I saw from people that I would consider friends saying Dave the GOAT. And I knew it would happen. I knew it would work because it always works with the group not being harmed. Because I've been seeing this same bullshit tactic from white people since I was a little kid. All black people have. And it's infuriating that Dave would literally use this tool of the masters to avoid accountability for his own bigotry. Dave uses the suicide of his trans friend to turn the tables on the trans community as if to say it's their fault because they're their own worst enemy. He made this one trans woman, his Herman Cain or Candace Owens, or insert whatever black talking head Republican grifting them out of money these days. Chappelle tells an awesome story about how their friendship started and then about the backlash that he incurred from his trans jokes. And in the wake of that backlash, how Daphne came out in support of Dave, which makes perfect sense. She was his friend. I have a few white friends. And I know because of how racism and bigotry work that the reality is any one of them might fuck around one day and do some shit that gets them drug on Twitter. That's just the sad reality of how racism works. And I want y'all to know, all my white friends watching, understand if that ever happens to you, I don't fucking know you. Don't look to me to save you. I'll maybe call you afterward to explain how you fucked up, but just understand, I'm not doing that shit. And I'm not making that joke to say that Daphne shouldn't have defended Dave Chappelle. That's her friend. That was her decision. I don't know the reality of what it's like to be trans, but I do know that mental health, depression, and suicide are persistent threats to trans people. I also am aware of how vicious trans Twitter can be. So I imagine that what Daphne experienced when she broke with her tribe was very difficult. And I don't think Dave is out of line to insinuate that this fed into Daphne's eventual suicide. So we tend to, especially in our Twitter bubbles and whatnot, dismiss the effects of cancel culture. And on some levels, it's definitely overblown especially when you hear rich people like Dave Chappelle or people in other communities talk about it. That's mostly nonsense. But we have to start recognizing that the nature of canceling and the ratio and the drag and the dog pile and all of those things, especially when within community, are extremely damaging. And we definitely have to start finding other ways to air our grievances and process our hurt when people that are close to us hurt us. But to really just have it be proof that he's not transphobic because some of his best friends are trans, and to use it to lecture this marginalized group as if it's their fault individually. That shit is heinous. Imagine if Seinfeld came on stage and said the N-word 100 times and then made jokes about people smoking crack and eating watermelon and said, it's okay because I was friends with Richard Pryor, and then used Richard Pryor's lifelong battle with addiction as a way to teach us black people a lesson about how to be better to white people. And we really are our own worst enemies, and we really need to address our issues before ever being critical of this other dominant group. The situation here is so bizarre coming from Dave Chappelle, who has shown himself to be highly capable of empathizing with other groups and also to be the type of guy to walk away from $50 million when he felt that white people were laughing at him and not with him. So he is very much aware of how jokes can be harmful and lead to harmful reinforcement of ideas and ideologies. But instead of acknowledging that and going back and writing better jokes, he tries to pull this move that white people have been doing for years, where they say or do something racist, and instead of holding themselves accountable, just throws out some bullshit and motherfuckers ate it up, hook, line, and sinker. But the sad thing is that it works. It's really impressive when you think on it, because now after doing that bullshit story, Dave Chappelle saying that it's trans people's oversensitivity, trans people's anger and hypervigilance that caused one of their own to take their life. Chappelle can now situate himself as the victim of this overly self-righteous, overly sensitive community that he, transphobic comedian Dave Chappelle, is being attacked by cancel culture. He even says, stop punching down on my people to end the show. And the narrative to everyone that doesn't know anything about trans issues is that trans people want to cancel Dave and don't want to hear the truth. And then you get into the ugly Netflix stuff and the aftermath, but this is going on long enough. So from my perspective, this is Dave Chappelle drawing a line in the sand that he will not be open to criticism. He will not have money taken out of his pocket or food taken out of his mouth, something that he's been very clear on about since returning. Dave, who came up as a comedian playing for these all-white crowds, I think has an innate fear of being minstrelized himself. That fear of being minstrelized, as he does trans people, as he did his friend Daphne, is what drove him to leave the Chappelle show when he recognized that the joke wasn't for everyone, that it was just on him. And I think this same thing has made him lean into meaner comedy and probably to even change the way he looks on stage since he came back. And it's why his comedy is much less witty and insightful and fun since returning. But the comedy itself doesn't have the same creativity behind it, which is what I think makes trans jokes and LGBTQ jokes so appealing, because you don't have to be that creative to make people laugh at jokes on those topics. People don't know any better, don't have the empathy for those communities, and so they're very easy, very willing to laugh about it. So what do we do here? To some of you, I feel like I'm speaking to the choir, I hope. To some people, I'm full of shit and you probably haven't gotten this far into the video. I don't expect to make folks completely reevaluate their worldview in 1 hour-long YouTube video. I have definitely missed some stuff, and I should not be the final voice you hear in regards to understanding trans issues. But what you can do after this is make a better effort, at least a better effort than Dave Chappelle did. Hell, just a few months ago, I myself asked a question on Reddit about TERFs and inadvertently offended a few people. This is not an easy or perfect thing to do, to understand people that are different from you. You just have to want to do it. If you say you are pro-black, you cannot be comfortable ignoring the plight and needs of black LGBTQ people. If you say that laws like the ones in North Carolina are wrong, then you can't be Team TERF. But you don't have to be a villain. You don't have to reside in a space of ignorance and bigotry because you just don't want to be wrong. Being wrong is okay. You can change your mind. Make an effort. Listen. Click some of these damn links in the description and do better. Do better than what Dave Chappelle did here. Because just like with Dave Chappelle, you aren't really being canceled. You aren't being criticized. People are just trying to bring a reality that you don't understand to your face. You can do better if you want to. You just have to actually want to.
I don't think he was coming from a place of hate, but I do think that he said a lot of transphobic things. A lot of his jokes or commentary was just really blatant transphobia. I think it came from a place of ignorance. I think that he doesn't understand anything about the LGBTQ I think he doesn't understand enough to make a salient point or to make a funny joke about it. I feel like he could have did a lot more research.
Black trans people are in a weird sort of triple jeopardy when it comes to social issues. Black trans women are brutalized by police and the same system just like black men, victims of patriarchy and misogyny just like cis women, and at the same time experiencing transphobia as a completely unique experience. We fold into every issue in a way that means we cannot be separated. Even just beyond trans people, a lot of the issues around transphobia rely on and expand our understanding of racism in these broader forms of oppression. This whole situation is nothing but childish and exclusionary tomfoolery.
Because no one's talking about this, right? No one. The white trans people aren't reckoning with the fact that they're the only people that are ever seen. And Dave and a lot of other black people aren't reckoning with the fact that, like, black trans people exist. And, like, it's hard because no one cares about us. Because we are murdered at higher rates, I think, than anyone else. And that's because it is more acceptable to murder a black woman or a black trans woman than it is to murder a white woman or a white trans woman. So it's easy just to pretend like we don't exist because we are the group that people are trying to unexist the most.
Ugh. We're gonna let the incense chill for this last little moment because it's a little special. Get comfortable. I have a cool announcement here. If you've been paying attention to my channel for the last few months with any type of closeness, you may have noticed that certain videos are appearing and disappearing and reappearing, or maybe there's some obnoxious blurred boxes, or maybe even a smanked gif or two that pop up on some of the videos. Well, that's because as a new and novice content creator who wants to make content around known media, it can be hard to do that with YouTube's current copyright policies. Further, while I was always going to make a video about Dave Chappelle, many of the videos that I want to make, say a critical analysis of black characters throughout the history of wrestling, or a look at the politics of aging, I call them dad rappers from my era, or maybe just an unhinged rant about being a millennial that's getting ready to hit their 40s, it's hard to guarantee that those types of videos may reach the needed audience to keep the algorithm gods happy. These types of challenges are why the streaming platform Nebula was created and why I have recently joined that crew. Nebula is an independent streaming platform that features some of your favorite content from creators like T1J, Maggie Mae Fish, Melita Pendulum, and others. Here, these creators can put together their content without fear of copyright strikes or claims or demonetization, etc. But they can also work on original content that you can only see there that may not be viable on YouTube. What's better is that Nebula has recently teamed up with CuriosityStream. So now you can get access both to Nebula's Streamy Award nominated unfiltered content along with thousands of high quality documentaries on CuriosityStream. In preparation for this video, I watched a short documentary from the Bright Now series called Can You Learn to Be Funny? This documentary explores not just the history, but the science and psychology of humor and helped me ground my discussion of humor and comedy in this video. You guys may not know it or not if this is your first video, but I've been pretty particular about the sponsorships and partnerships I endorse on the channel. And I wouldn't want to endorse anything at this point in my career that I myself would not or do not use. So trust me when I say that the combination of these two services is well worth the price, and the price is cheap. If you use my promo code F.D Signifier, you will get 26% off for an entire year's subscription, which comes up to less than $15 for the entire year. And that'll support me, educational, high-quality documentarians, and tons of independent content creators. With that said, I want to say thank you to the team at Nebula and CuriosityStream for taking me in and helping to make this video happen. Please check out the sign-up link in the description, and please look forward to checking out more content from F.D Signifier over on Nebula as my channel there grows along with this one.